Hi, I'm Erik Voss, and this is a review of It, the Stephen King horror film directed by Andy Muschietti. And rather than just ask, was it good or was it scary? Yes, by the way, on both accounts. In fact, I just saw it, and now I'm recording this alone in the studio at 3 in the morning. Big mistake. In this video, I'm gonna explain the key device that made it so effective and how we see it in each element of the movie. And while I don't intend to straight up spoil any major plot points from the movie, I will be covering aspects that, if you avoided all trailers and consider any basic character detail to be a spoiler, then to cover my bases, spoilers ahead. Okay, so with It, both in the novel and in this movie, the reason it's so powerful, it makes you, the viewer, decide what fear is. Most other horror films are more one-sided. Hey, here's the thing that scares a lot of us, isn't it scary? They tell us what to be afraid of. It could be a beast that you're hunting that might sneak up on you first. It could be a sickness that you might catch. Or it could be some social anxiety, like a woman not being in control of her own body, or a racial minority being systemically targeted. But It is more of a conversation. It redefines fear as something subjective, something that looks different to each of us. Why? Well, because as children, we each had unique traumas that messed us up in different ways. So, in the story, the entity known as It is a shapeshifter. It manifests into different forms, depending on whatever child it's feeding on and what that kid is afraid of. The title, It, is literally the most ambiguous, anonymous pronoun. It is a mirror reflecting our own deepest, darkest fears. And now that I've gotten a chance to see It, what's most impressive about this movie is it goes out of its way to visually reach out to you, the viewer, sneaking out of the frame in very subtle, missable ways so that as you watch it and you notice these little moments, it's almost like It is saying, hey, you. No one else is reacting to me right now, but you can see me. It's your fear that I'm feeding on. So let's talk about how this plays out with the characters. Okay, the main heroes of this story are the 7 members of the Losers Club: Bill, Beverly, Richie, Ben, Mike, Eddie, and Stanley. And the movie does such a good job of characterizing these kids by the things that frighten them. For Bill, it takes the form of his little brother Georgie. Losing him haunts Bill the most. For Beverly, it takes the form of sexual trauma. She's a victim of both real sexual harassment and abuse, and of all the false rumors about her. Then there's Richie, played by Finn Wolfhard, Mike from Stranger Things. He's the comedian of the group, and he has the best lines in the movie.
Doesn't smell like caca to me, senor.
Have you ever heard of a staph infection?
Also, staph infection.
So it makes sense that the clown, an archaic, too kid-friendly symbol of comedy, would be his enemy. For Ben, it takes the form of the historical record that he pours through in the library, which is a reflection of his greatest fear, social isolation. For Mike, it is the trauma that he suffered as a child, losing his parents in a fire. For Eddie, it takes the form of anything disgusting in the movie: gray water, a leper who appears to him, reflecting his hypochondria. And for Stanley, his greatest fear is disappointing his rabbi father, so for him, it takes the form of a woman in a painting in his father's office. Now here, I'm gonna get into some more specifics in the clever visuals that the director uses to bring these fears to life. And if you haven't seen the movie yet, I actually think it'll be fun for you to keep an eye out for them. But if you'd rather stumble upon them on your own, skip to this time. Okay, for Bill's fear, the director uses the image of rain to trigger it. You'll notice a single drop of rain from a leak in the ceiling is enough to lure Bill back into this memory of his lost brother. Meanwhile, for Beverly, the image of blood has a symbolic meaning. Early in the film, Beverly is seen buying tampons in the pharmacy, and then after the creepy pharmacist hits on her, and after her father hints at sexually abusing her, blood explodes out of her sink. And I know this is kind of gross, but it's manifesting as Beverly's fear of sexual maturity. And then when Richie finally reveals his fear of clowns at the 4th of July event, he looks across the park and shudders when he looks at this clown. Now, I'm almost certain that that clown is Bill Skarsgard, the actor who plays Pennywise. He's just wearing different makeup. So it is appearing to Richie in this moment. It also appears to Richie in the house later on when that clown's doll head turns in the background, following him across the room. The director also sneaks it in the background with Ben in the library. When Ben flips through the pictures of the headless boy, you might notice the woman in the background staring directly at him, frozen, smiling. Now, the crazy thing about this is that none of these kids ever notice or react to these appearances. And that's because the director put them there for us, This is it inviting us to map our own fears over him. Now, I want to wrap up this section on casting characters by talking about Bill Skarsgard as Pennywise the Clown. He is fantastic in this movie. He actually goes a very different route than Tim Curry did in the It TV miniseries in the 90s, which will always be a classic to me. But Skarsgard instead tones down Pennywise, making him much quieter and scaring us in more subtle ways. The coolest example of this are his eyes. Check this out. One of Skarsgard's eyes is pointed in one direction, while the other is pointed directly at the camera. You can tell actually by covering each eye one at a time. This was actually an effect that the director planned ahead of time, and he was gonna use CGI to do it. But Skarsgard told him that he could actually do this with his eyes naturally.
And he said, well, I can do that. He did like that, and I said, good job, man. You just saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And the effect here is that it produces a meta discomfort in us. Almost like Pennywise could pop out of the movie screen at us. Just like the girl in the ring, or like how Pennywise himself teases with the fourth wall later in the movie. The trailer for this movie broke YouTube view records, and I think a big part of that was the nostalgia people our age feel for past versions of it. The book, the Tim Curry version. I actually remember walking through Blockbuster as a kid, averting my eyes when I passed It on the shelf. I know, right? Blockbuster used to exist. And I think by one of his eyes staring at us through the lens, it's almost like this Pennywise knows how terrified we still are of this image, and he's toying with our own childhood memories. Okay, let's move on to another form this interpretation of fear takes, the setting of the film. The story of It takes place in the fictional town of Derry, Maine. In Stephen King's novel, the town of Derry has its own malevolent history that this movie does touch on. The movie also resets the time period from the 50s to the 80s, which actually gives the script new ways to express these kids' anxiety, with hypochondriac Eddie freaking out over the AIDS epidemic, and new kid on the block Ben worried that he'll be judged for loving lame 80s pop music. But really, I think the film gets more mileage out of the fact that the town as a whole is yet another manifestation of fear for these kids. The adults of Derry are monsters. You'll notice that none of the adults in this movie act like real people. They're all one-dimensional, violent, and cruel. They terrorize these kids. In fact, for Beverly, Eddie, Stanley, Mike, and Bill, and the bully Henry, their parents directly trigger their traumas. And of course, there's that creepy pharmacist, fuck that guy. And when Georgie and Ben are both in danger at different points early in the movie, adults witness it, and both times they're in a position to help them, and they do nothing. These adults are, in their inaction, just as monstrous as Pennywise is. So why does the film do this? Transforming the adult characters into treacherous set pieces is yet another way that the director reinforces this theme. Fear takes all forms. And yes, sometimes that means that people who are supposed to be protecting us. Did it work? Literally, did it? I think Andy Muschietti proved that a tale of traumatized children teaming up to conquer their fears can totally work on its own. We love seeing it with Stranger Things, so it makes sense that we'd love it with the Stephen King story that inspired Stranger Things. But in this case, it worked because the director took the time to characterize each one of these kids, showing how fear takes a different form for each one of them, and by inviting the viewer in with extreme attention to detail so that the film scares us in unique ways. This is a truly frightening film that I look forward to seeing again and discussing further. Honestly, there was some amazing shot composition and practical effects here that I can't wait to analyze, not to mention the amazing performances by all these young actors. But ultimately, it owes its success mostly to its focus on the core concept that Stephen King found to be the scariest and most worthy of exploration. A word, actually, that Pennywise exalts almost as a victory cry in a key moment in this movie: fear. What do you find scariest about this new version of It? And how do you think it compares to the past version? Share your reaction and your terrifying childhood memories about It in the comments below, or hit me up on Twitter at Erik Voss, or to New Rockstars at New Rockstars. And if you really like us and want to help us make more videos like this, you can contribute to us on Patreon. Big thanks to all of our current patrons, especially Wilhelmina Ebbeson. Thanks for watching. I'm clearly exhausted, so I'm gonna try to sleep now. Do you guys hear something?